Thanks for joining our final session. I'm David Warden, the co-founder of 80/20 Endurance, with Matt Fitzgerald, the co-founder of 80/20 Endurance. And again, as part of our last session, we're so glad that you've joined us today. And I know I've learned a lot. I hope you have too. And we're excited to be able to have this experience with you. Many of you know Matt Fitzgerald. He is a prolific writer of more than 30 books. His most recent two books he's published, On Pace and 80/20 Endurance, were published in just the last 5 months. So he's been on a tear recently. And we're excited to have him as our keynote final presenter today. And Matt and I do spend a lot of time cuddled up on a couch. This is very normal and common for us. We work like this together all the time. So I'll turn the time over to Matt, and I'm looking forward to your presentation.
All right. Thanks so much, David. Okay. Boy, it is an incredible honor to follow such a stellar lineup of speakers, many of whom I count as friends. And I'd like to give just a quick shout out to Hannah Hunstadt, our director of marketing, for putting together this fantastic lineup. I will do my very best. I'm aware that for those of you who've been viewing from the very beginning, we're 4 hours in, either live, or if you're watching this as a recording later on. I'm going to do my very best to keep you entertained and also edify you in the next 45-ish minutes, and leave time for those final questions you may have. I am going to now share my screen, and we will dive into my presentation. Okay, this is a provocatively titled presentation. Who needs a human coach when you can have a robot coach? Spoiler alert, my answer to that question is everyone. And this presentation was really inspired by two things. One is, I've been a coach myself for a very long time, but more recently, I've become a coach of coaches. 80/20 Endurance spent the last year and a half about developing our own endurance coach certification program, which just rolled out quite recently. There's an online learning component, and there's also a full-length book. That's one of the two recent ones that David mentioned that I've written, just titled 80/20 Endurance. So same material, just two different media. So, in the process of working with my colleagues to create this coaching course, I learned more about coaching than I ever knew before, just from practicing the craft, and just kind of developed a pretty clear philosophy, a set of beliefs about the art of coaching. So that's one reason. That was one inspiration. The more immediate or proximal inspiration for this talk is ChatGPT. Sorry, and those of you who have paid attention to the hoopla surrounding this, you know what it is. If you don't, ChatGPT is a chat bot. So it's basically a software application that lives online that uses natural language to interact with real human beings. So and it's really quite amazingly sophisticated. So you can ask. This is why there's a lot of freak out around it. You can ask ChatGPT. I'm having trouble with it. GPT. I want it to be a B. To write an essay for maybe a sociology class you're taking in college, and it can write a reasonably competent essay in about a minute. And the professor who teaches that course might not have any idea that it was a robot who wrote it, and not you. So this is like, the AI revolution is here. This is like a game-changing technology, and clearly, we've crossed the Rubicon. There's only more to come. And a lot of writers, I being one, are a little bit freaked out about how sophisticated this technology is, because we wonder, well, will there be any need for human writers before now that robots, essentially AI apps, can do what we do reasonably well. And then also a lot of endurance coaches that have their hair on fire about this top technology, because another thing that it can do is create a reasonably competent endurance training plan for an athlete, again, with pretty minimal input. Like your average athlete could just sort of request a plan, get it in about a minute. And so that has us on freaking out. So this really is not actually, honestly, a talk about AI. It's really a talk about coaching. But the recent current events surrounding artificial intelligence, provides kind of a nice aperture for opening up a discussion about what coaching really is, and what it means to do it well. And so that's what this is. There'll be a fair amount of AI talk in the minutes ahead, in the slides ahead, but we're really talking about coaching here fundamentally. Here's a quick overview of the ground we will cover. First, I'm just going to talk about the sort of the state of play with artificial intelligence, particularly as it relates to training endurance athletes. Then we'll move on to talk about what makes a good coach, and then from there, understanding what it is that good coaches, what distinguishes the best coaches from the average. We'll look at 5 specific things that athletes need from their coaches that AI really can't give them, just by virtue of not being human. And then, when I put this together, I realized I had more than 5 things. So I've got a bonus slide that talks about kind of a grab bag of some of the other things that really effective human endurance coaches can do that at this stage of affairs that the AI technologies cannot. And then I'll leave time for questions. So what you see here, this is a video playing. I'm actually going to you can halfway pay attention to it. I'm going to talk about what you're actually looking at here in a minute. First, though, I'd like to give you a couple definitions. These are pulled straight off of Wikipedia, which is the most reliable source of information on planet Earth. It's never wrong about anything, but I think these kind of passed the laugh test anyway. So first, Wikipedia's definition of artificial intelligence is the theory and development of computer systems able to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence, such as visual perception, speech recognition, decision-making, and translation between languages. So artificial intelligence, AI, is really ubiquitous now. Like whether you really understand what it is or not, your life is impacted by it. A good example is if you are a Spotify user like I am, and you look at how the Spotify app is able to recommend music that you have never heard before, but will probably like based on the music that you have an expressed preference for. So that's just one example of something. It's just basically silicon-based applications that can replicate things that up to this point in technological history have required a human brain to do. So just doing brain stuff without the brain, basically. Another definition I'd like to give you is that of machine learning. This is again Wikipedia. Machine learning Wikipedia defines machine learning as follows: machine learning algorithms build a model based on sample data known as training data in order to make predictions or being explicitly programmed to do so. So machine learning is basically kind of a subcategory of artificial intelligence. And it's the one that has the most relevance to endurance training. So now that I've given you those 2 different definitions, I'm going to tell you what you're looking at right now on screen. This is a video taken straight from ChatGPT. This is my friend Jake, the organizer of the Endeavor Run retreats. We just had one in San Diego. And when ChatGPT was first released, Jake went nuts with it, and he went onto the app and asked it to build a 16-week marathon training plan for a 30-year-old female runner looking to break 2:59. Gave it just a couple of other parameters, and then boom, the whole thing is done in 3 minutes, which is pretty incredible and like a little alarming. If you are an endurance coach and this is how you make your living, to see this. Now, if you're looking closely at what you're seeing, you will see that it's actually a crap training plan. It is not a good training plan at all, but still it's, these things are only going to get better. And just the fact that it can do something that doesn't look completely crazy in so little time with so little natural language input is pretty remarkable. So it's the kind of thing that definitely gets your attention if you do what I do for a living. So now, having established these definitions, we'll move on to talk about what distinguishes. Well, you know what? We're not going to do that quite yet. So I should say, I've talked a lot about ChatGPT, but that is, that was not really designed for use by endurance athletes or to replace endurance coaches. But there are existing AI-based training platforms for endurance athletes that already exist and existed before ChatGPT came out. And these are really the reason I give you a definition of machine learning is that machine learning is really what these applications use in order to create dynamic training plans for endurance athletes. So the way you do it is, and actually, even though I'm not really down on AI, really the thesis of this presentation is that humans do it better and probably always will. But I do not deny that AI is way better than nothing for endurance athletes. Like winging it without any experience or knowledge as an athlete is not going to give you this kind of results that an AI-based dynamic training plan can. So the way you do it is actually, it seems like I talk about, robots doing what humans do, but at bottom, it really is robots learning from humans. So, it's sort of like there are 3 layers to it, and the bottom layer is humans. So the way you create a good AI-based, robot endurance coach is you provide inputs that show the application how human coaches coach endurance athletes. So all you're really doing it is giving it examples of best practices that currently exist in human to human endurance coaching. And then the application, if it's robust enough, is just able to identify the patterns. Okay, what is the logic that human coaches use to make their decisions? And then it creates plans that sort of, just basically do the same thing. So it's way better than nothing. And it's, like I said, it's only going to get better. And so these 2 examples, one is TriDot, which is, triathlon focused online, AI powered endurance training platform. And then this other one on the right is called Endurance AI, which I actually hadn't even heard of before I put together this presentation. So just a couple of examples. Don't go to these websites because we want you to go to 8020endurance.com. But this just shows that this stuff is here and it's happening now. So now we move on to talk about what does it actually mean to be a good coach? So the coach you're looking at here is Steve Kerr, who coaches the reigning NBA champion Golden State Warriors basketball team, very, very much universally looked at as an exceptional basketball coach. And here's a quote from him. Coaching is 90% creating an environment and 10% strategy. And is that really true? I mean, it carries some weight coming from someone like him. But frankly, this is something I've heard from high-level coaches, various versions of this ratio many times. In fact, Ben Rosario, who spoke earlier, I remember having a conversation with him not long ago when he put it at, I think, 80-20, as a matter of fact, coincidentally. So it was about roughly the same breakdown as exactly how Ben looks at it as well, where they look at, strategy and technical knowledge are important, but they're actually the easy part of coaching. If you don't know it, you can learn it. If you don't know it, you can look it up. But the stuff that really distinguishes the best coaches are what is often referred to as the soft skills of coaching, like creating an environment. That's not really too terribly tangible, but it's also not easy. And so you have to have the knowledge, you have to know the strategy, but then your emphasis goes to, things like motivation, creating an environment, people skills, stuff like that. So you hear this from a lot of high-level coaches, Steve Kerr just being one of them. But again, is it actually true? So that's when, again, it carries some weight coming from individuals like Steve Kerr and Ben Rosario, but it's nice to actually see if there's any empirical support for this notion. And that's what we're going to get into now. So the slide you're looking at now kind of summarizes the results of a study that was done. It was actually a PhD thesis done back in 2024. I'm going to give you the woman's name for proper credit. Lindsay Siana Ronayne was her name. And what she did is she looked at college athletes over the course in team sports over the course of an entire season. So just, a number of weeks. And the inputs, that she was looking at were how coaches behaved. So the data was collected through interviews with, I think it was, I'm going to look it up here, 180 college team sports athletes. So a good sample size. And they asked these athletes both early in the season and late in the season to just sort of describe their coach's style, their behaviors. And then the outcomes they were looking at were team cohesion, which of course in any team sport is incredibly important to performance, and also perceived efficacy. So they weren't measuring performance outcomes. One or two of the studies we'll look at a little bit later do. This one was more of the team members' subjective sense of how well they were performing. So you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, the behaviors that were positively associated with team cohesion and efficacy over the course of a season were democratic behaviors. So the coach just sort of giving every player a voice in the process, providing training and instruction, social support, and then positive feedback. So all of those things contributed to team cohesion and efficacy. The things that detracted from these outcomes were autocratic behaviors. So just kind of a dictatorial approach on the part of the coach, negative feedback, and lack of feedback. So you can already see here, like if we look at just like from, athletes' perspective of what makes a coach effective, a lot of the stuff is actually, it doesn't really have much to do with the coach's knowledge of the sport. Things like, giving athletes a voice and providing social support. That's not something a robot does, right? That's something that a human being with good people skills do. So we're already starting to see that, when Steve Kerr says that it's 90% creating a culture, he knows what he's talking about. So, I would love to, the trouble with looking at, trying to understand just how little or much not technical knowledge matters to endurance coaching is that it's actually quite hard to measure knowledge in an endurance sport. Like, how knowledgeable is the coach? 1 out of 10. I don't know how to measure that. So I looked for data on this because I really want to see, like, can we attach these behaviors to actual measurable outcomes? We're not really there yet too much on sports. So I decided to make an analogy with medicine, where there is actually some solid research that looks at factors like knowledge and people skills in terms of, like, in medicine, it's like life or death is kind of the outcomes we look at. So, pretty measurable. Interestingly, I think, medicine is not coaching, but it's close enough that we can make a fair analogy here. So this study, the next few slides summarize the results of a study. Don't know who did it, but it's one of a few in this category. I could have picked another. She looked at how often doctors get sued. So the question is, which of these two factors is scientifically proven to have, actually, it's not from a particular study. This is sort of a summary of all the research. So which of these two has a positive association with patient outcomes and satisfaction? I think you all know the correct answer is number 2. Really interesting, right? So, that phrase bedside manner just refers to, a physician's people skills and doctors. I have a brother who is a doctor, and he said the reason I'm better than most doctors is that I actually care about my patients and treat them like human beings. He's like, that alone sets me apart from a lot of doctors who just walk in the room and they just want to be done with you. And it's not just my brother. According to studies, the studies I looked at, it actually, doctors who have good people skills actually get better health outcomes from their patients. And then just continuing the theme, which of these two factors is scientifically proven to have no association with patient outcome? I think you know the answer. If you didn't get the first one right, you have to get this one right because it's the only other option. So experience level has no impact, and experience is a rough proxy for knowledge, but let's just pretend it's a perfect substitute. So we're basically saying that, like, people skills matter much more to how effective a doctor is than how much they know. And I think I think coaching is similar enough that you can generalize these results to coaching. So I'll just read it. A human coach is preferable to a robot coach for pretty much the same reason a human spouse is preferable to a robot spouse. The idea being, like, you presumably wouldn't marry a robot because a robot, you can't have you can't have a real relationship with it. And coaching, it's the same deal. Like, if you don't know much about like how coaching works, you might think that things like knowledge are the difference maker. The coach who knows the most is likely to be the best, but it's really all about a relationship, and what kind of relationships the coach is able to forge with their athletes. Like, that is what distinguishes the best coach. The woman whose image you see on the right-hand side of the screen is a researcher at Loughborough University in the UK. Her name is Sophia Jowett, and she studies what's called relational coaching. Particularly as both actually in the executive coaching space, but also she has a primary interest in sports coaching. And to give you a sense of like her take on things and how relational coaching applies to sports, I'm just going to read you a quote from one of her studies. It goes like this: "To be a technically good coach is one thing, but with what gives the coach the edge, i.e., the extra effectiveness, is this in this unforgiving and relentless competitive sport environment, is the connection developed between the coach and the athlete. It is this connection that makes a difference to technical coaching, because it supplies coaches with the key to opening the door to their athletes' capabilities, capacities, and potential." So in relational coaching, it's based. So the quote I just gave you is from kind of a review, a summary of the research that's been done in this area. But what they found is like the essence of being good at forging results-oriented relationships, but between coaches and athletes. The formula they've come up with for it is, they call it the 3+1 C's. So basically we can say the 4 C's. So the first one is closeness. So coaches create effective and productive relational dynamics with athletes. The first factor that goes into that is closeness. And you can just think about all the people some of them you would describe as being close to you, others not so close. That's exactly what we're talking about here. So when coaches are effective, when they get good results from their athletes, it is because in part they have a close bond with their athletes, and their athletes feel that and know that. Second one is commitment. And these are not fancy jargon. We all know what commitment means as well. When an athlete knows that their coach doesn't just care about them, but cares about them in the long term, is in it to win it with them, come what may, that is another factor. So that's the second of the 4 C's. The third is complementarity. And complementarity is just the idea that both athlete and coach have well-defined roles in the relationship, and those roles are complementary. So neither of them can do it alone. The athlete can't get out the coach can't get out on the race course and race for the athlete. And then, the athlete can't do what the coach does, but they recognize that and they fit together in a way that makes them an effective team that gets good results. And then the fourth of the 4 C's is co-orientation. And they just went out of their way to get another C there. I think it's really just orientation. And that is when you basically feel like you're on the same page. So when you have a close relationship, especially one that goes, that extends over time, as many coach-athlete relationships do, you start to sort of be aligned. Like, it's very rare for an athlete to be happy with how things are going and the coach to be unhappy with how things are going. Like, you tend to you're on the same page, you're going through the same journey. So you're basically feeling what the other person's feeling, but that's good. You want that. In a coach athlete relationship, it's basically, you rise and fall together. And that's actually important in order to just, get the results that you seek in athletics. So that is why you wouldn't want to marry a robot or have a robot as your coach. So now we're going to talk about 5 specific things that athletes need from their coach that a cannot give them. The first is caring. I absolutely love this photograph on the right. That's my friend, a Flagstaff-based running coach, and obviously hugging a successful athlete after a race. So, again, caring is not fancy jargon. We all know essentially what that is. The quote you see on the page here is from a really interesting study that was done with a group of 14 elite Swedish athletes. And it was a longitudinal study that looked, well, actually it wasn't, but it was retrospective that looked over their development from the time they were sort of junior elites to the time they were, world-beating senior elites, and some of them were actually already retired. So they did extensive interviews with all these athletes to talk about their journey, like how they got from being promising kids in their respective sports to being some of the best athletes in the world as adults, and tried to tease out themes and tried to figure out, like, did they all sort of see their journey in the same way or similar ways, seeing like, this is what mattered to me. This is not what didn't matter to me. And what they found on the coaching side was that caring, when they had coaches at critical points in their life, particularly when they were transitioning from the junior to the senior level, who really cared about them, that was difference making for them. It's part of the reason they were able to make the jump up to the world-class level. And in the study, the authors talk about, okay, well, what is caring? If you look under the hood, like there are really sort of two factors when it comes to like coaches, how coaches care for athletes, that really are impactful. The first one, and I love this word, is engrossment, because it resonates very much with like how I feel about how I experience my coaching work. Engrossment basically means like the coach is sort of like deeply interested and even fascinated by their athletes. Imagine looking at it from the athlete side, and those of you who are athletes on the call, who are listening and watching, who have coaches, like, if your coach is engrossed in your athlete journey, like they just seem like deeply interested in you and in your training and your competition, your successes. And that's really important. You want to know that the coach is not halfway distracted every time they're interacting with you, but there's nothing they would rather be doing than coaching you, and that's engrossment. And the other one is the other sort of element that underlies caring from coaches is the term they use is motivational displacement, and that really means that, like, essentially the coach is a servant, and the coach puts himself or herself, his or her needs are secondary to the athletes. And you can just see how that feeds into effective coaching as well, where it's like, it's not about me, the coach, it's about you, the athlete, and your success is my success. That is it. There's a humility that is kind of interwoven with that, and coaches, the great coaches, they have egos, they want to win, but it's really it all is channeled through their athletes, and they really put their athletes' interests ahead of their own. So that's what caring looks like from coaches. And obviously these are things that, like an artificial intelligence app can create, a very sensible training plan, presumably, but it can't do engrossment. An app cannot be like engrossed in an athlete, and it cannot, put its own interests secondary to the athlete's interests, because it has no interests. Let's see. Whoops, skip ahead. So the second one is trust. Now, I will say that there is a sense in which you can trust a robot, or you can trust a software program. We're really talking about reliability. If a technology that you are using as an athlete is reliable, then you can invest a certain amount of trust in it. But there's a different kind of trust that can only exist between human beings, right? And that's sort of that higher level trust is something that only a human coach can provide, and really that only the better coaches really get right. So the graphic you're seeing on the left kind of summarizes the results of another study. This one was published in the Journal of Health and Sports Science back in 2013. Another fairly large scale study that involved 215 competitive athletes as subjects. And what the researchers were trying to do here is look at the factors that created trust in the coach among athletes. So, what was it that created buy-in from athletes? with respect to their coaches. And then what were the results? Like, so they looked at, they looked at athletes who had a high level of trust in their coach and athletes who had a low level of coach in their trust in their coach. And then what were the differences in terms of like, what did that get them in the end? So that's what you're seeing graphically represented here. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you're seeing the four factors that inspired trust in a coach within athletes. And so the four are justice. So a perceived sense that the coach was just and created a fair environment was one. Benevolence, which is, kind of another way of saying caring. Like, if the coach seemed to really want their athletes to succeed and to be well, that benevolence inspired trust. Another one was integrity. And we all know what integrity is like. Basically, if your word is your bond, then you're demonstrating integrity, and that inspires trust. And then the fourth one would be competence. Now, interestingly, if you look at all these four factors that create trust, really only one of them, it's fair to say that artificial intelligence, endurance coach can be competent. If it creates good training, that is a form of competence. But the other three, again, are really only things you can find in human to human relationships. So these things inspired trust. Now, what were the results of trust? And what the researchers find was that when athletes had a higher level of trust in their coaches, they were more willing to cooperate. They believed they performed better. Their perception was that they performed better, and then they were more committed to the coach. So those are the outcomes. That's what you get from inspiring trust in athletes as a coach. The third factor is accountability. So this is another one where, to be fair, technology can create a sense of accountability that does benefit athletes by helping to keep them on track. But again, as with trust, there is a sort of higher level that only the interpersonal dynamic between a human coach and an athlete can bring about. And so I like this photo on the left because you can tell it's basically, a coach kind of reading the riot act to an athlete. I can almost, like, if there were like, text bubbles, I could see the coach saying, "What the hell were you thinking out there?" And the athlete saying, "I'm sorry, coach." That's accountability right there. And I think about it just, in my own, my own coaching work with the athletes I work one-on-one with. Every now and then I am disappointed in them. I'm never disappointed in them for things they can't really help. I'm really disappointed when they repeat a mistake that we sort of talked about. There are various ways where an athlete can just let their coach down, and really by letting themselves down. And when that happens, I don't hesitate to express my disappointment because it creates that higher level of accountability. So, you don't want to just be a jerk about it, but you're actually serving your athlete. You're serving your athlete's interests by putting just a little fear in them of consequences of disappointing them. Like, you're just creating a kind of accountability that, again, a robot, just can't. The screenshot from the right is from, anyone know, the movie, the Silver Screen classic, Newt Rockne, All-American football coach, Newt Rockne, and that line is from the most famous American football halftime speech of all time, where Newt Rockne was Notre Dame's coach, and they were playing against Army. It was a war of attrition. I think the final score of the game was 8-7. So this is halftime. It might have been 0-0 or 2-3. And so, basically Newt Rockne exploited the accountability factor to motivate his athletes to get out there and kick Army's butt in the second half. So he told a story about a real tearjerker about a pilot who died in World War II. And it was like, his name was Gip. And so Newt Rockne told his athletes to get back out there in the second half and win one for the Gipper. And of course they won happily ever after. And yes, that is Ronald Reagan playing Newt Rockne. Oh no, he's playing the Gip in that movie. Okay, we'll move on. Number 4, motivation, right? Coaches are motivators. Like, you want athletes to be self-motivated, but there's a heck of a lot a coach can do to motivate athletes. So in this study here, well, this is, again, another sort of graphical representation of the results of a relevant study. This study, this one is the one where we actually finally get to look at actual measurable results, which is important. So this study involved judo athletes, which I just learned in the process of reading that study are called judokas. So 101 judo athletes were interviewed right before, they were basically interviewed at weigh-in time before your competition, a tournament. And so they were interviewed about their level of motivation and also other factors related to their motivation. And then the researchers actually looked at how the athletes performed in the competition itself. So they were able to look, was there any difference? What did it matter to be more motivated? And here's what they found. They were looking at not just motivation, but factors that fed motivation in these athletes. And so we start at the top with the coach. The coach provides something called autonomy support. And so that is basically where they're not just telling their athlete what to do. They're actually trying to empower their athlete to make their own decisions and sort of like be their own coach. So the coaches who did a good job of supporting autonomy in their athletes, they were rewarded with a higher level of this is the term used in the study, self-determined motivation. So, the more empowered the athlete was to sort of call their own shots, the more intrinsically motivated they were. And guess what? When they looked at the results of these 101 athletes in the judo tournament, the ones who had more autonomy support from the coach and were more motivated got better results, or actually, performed better in the tournament. So finally, we see some empirical evidence that some of these soft skills that human coaches have, this one in particular being motivating athletes, lead to, ultimately, as a coach, you want to create a good experience for your athlete, but you're also trying to get good results for your athlete. It is a sport after all. Finally, number 5 here is empathy. Again, another term we all basically know what empathy is. I grabbed this quote from an article on the Big Think website. You can read it for yourselves, but this is kind of obvious stuff. Like, a computer can sort of pretend it cares; it can't actually care. And empathy is a huge one and actually in all kinds of relationships, but coaching as well. I think about as a lifelong endurance athlete myself, I've been through pretty much anything that any athlete I coach could ever go through. Not absolutely everything, but no matter what it is that comes along, any type of setback or challenge an athlete faces, I can relate to it personally on a human level somehow, and that makes a big difference. Because when I can tell an athlete, hey, I know this sucks, I know you're struggling, but I was right where you are once, and here's what I did, and here's how I came out the other side. That is difference making for a lot of athletes. It just gives them like a hope and a belief, that it kind of inspires trust. I say, hey, take a leap of faith and do this, and this, and you'll get the other side of this. It's exactly the same reason that in drug rehabilitation programs, most of the effective counselors are former drug addicts, right? It's like, it's one thing to be, a trained counselor and to be able to, give good advice to someone who is struggling with an addiction. But if you were addicted yourself at one time, like the bond that you can create, that sort of relatability, is just, it's incredibly powerful. And coaches can do the same thing. As human beings who go through stuff, we can use the power of empathy to be better coaches for our athletes. So those are the 5. And then the bonus one here is actually a whole grab bag of other things that human coaches can do, and chatbots cannot. Among them are strategy, creativity, intuition, analogizing, contextualization. This quote is from a really, really interesting interview that appeared recently in the New York Times. It was in the hoopla that surrounded the ChatGPT rollout. And so they interviewed this woman, the woman you see here is Yejin Choi, who's one of the world's leading experts in artificial intelligence. And I learned a lot actually from reading this article. And one thing, she knows better than anyone as a very smart human who is a pioneer in AI. She knows exactly what AI can't do that humans can. And what she explained in this article, in this quote that's excerpted here, what she's saying is like, actually, most of what humans know and can do cognitively, they are never taught, never. Whereas artificial intelligence apps like ChatGPT, they can only do what they're taught to do. So there's like, and those who know like a little bit, only enough to be dangerous about AI, they tend to think that like intelligence is intelligence and the substrate or the platform, the intelligence is irrelevant. But that's baloney. Like a silicon-based intelligence, simply just whether it's better or worse, cannot be the same as an organically rooted intelligence. Just to give you one example, think of something like memory. Like we all know that computers, including AI apps, have a thing called memory. They are able to store data and retrieve it. That is completely different from human memory. Like think about the first race you ever did. Just take a second. Okay, first race. What just happened there, you remembering the first race you ever did, that memory you had, you've never had before. Every time a human retrieves a memory from their own past, it's different. And that is so because just it's organic. So your memory every time you retrieve it from the recesses of your mind, whereas that's completely different from what we call memory in a software application. And so point being, like, because humans don't need to be taught most of the things we can do things that computers cannot. One that I think of, and to this point about exceptions, like that's where it really matters. Like I have a firm belief that every single athlete is an exception in some sense. And the most effective coaches, we're all human and we all sort of basically respond to training in the same ways. But when you want to get an athlete to fulfill, to reach the 100% of their God-given potential, to get that last 20% out of them, you have to be able to coach them as an exception. And I'm thinking of one athlete I coach right now who was struggling at one point. And at one point, I just got a hunch to suggest that she do shallow water pool runs. So she was a runner who did a little bit of swimming as cross training. I thought, you know what, just get in the pool and run in there, like up to your waist. And it ended up working out really, really well. So well that even after she came out the other side of the particular struggle she was dealing with, we kept them as part of her program. They just made her more durable. She liked them. And it just, they sort of rounded out her fitness, and it was just a hunch. AI doesn't get hunches. That's not a thing. And so we can just, as humans, we can pull from different domains and say, you know what, this kind of reminds me of something. Let's give that a try. And so all these kind of, just hard to define, like human cognitive skills we have are superpowers relative to artificial intelligence. So I think I did pretty decent with the time here. I'm sort of coming full circle here. The image that you're now seeing on this last slide is from the aforementioned book that I wrote as part of the 80/20 endurance coaching certification program. And it is now available, right?
It's really close. If not available now,
okay.
It's really close. Stay tuned.
Here I go again.
The physical copies exist.
Yes. And so, but you can register for this course now. Go to
learning.8020endurance.com.
Right on. Yes. And so a big part of our mission here, quite honestly. And so, I was basically, if I was going to summarize this, the presentation I just gave you in 4 words, it would be 3 cheers for coaches. Because, I learned recently, actually just within the last few months, I learned that only 5% have a coach. So 1 out of 20. And part of our mission here with this certification that we've created is we think a lot more runners and other endurance athletes should have coaches. But there's reasons for that. There's reasons it's only 1 in 20, right? And so we want to help overcome some of those barriers. So we want to bring more athletes into coaching, but we also want to bring more athletes to coaches. Not really so, for money-making reasons, but just because coaches have a huge impact. Good coaches have a huge positive impact on athletes' experience and the results. So we're really excited about this, and it's only just the beginning. So yeah, if you were inspired by this talk to become a coach, I know a way you can do it. You just took down that URL David gave you. I'm going to stop the screen sharing, and we can get into. Thank you. We can get into questions.
Great. And if you have any questions, you can post those on the questions or the chat or the questions tab in the Excel events application. And Matt, I'll get things started. Yeah, I feel so small. Look at me. I'm like this little teeny.
Where'd your pillow
I'm like
go?
a Matryoshka doll inside of the Matryoshka doll. Here, yeah, I better sit the pillow. I'm gonna borrow that. There we go.
So David's not short, by the way. I'm 9 feet tall.
Yeah. So much better. So Matt, let me. This is interesting because to me, this is kind of the second year in a row that you've had somewhat of an AI-related theme. Right.
Yep.
Last year was a similar, not really that similar, but it was related. And I also feel like even before that, you called me one day and said we should think about this. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So how long have you been thinking about AI and how it impacts coaching? And tell me about your evolution. Like, where did you start when you first thought about AI and coaching, and maybe where you are today with it?
Yeah. In last year's presentation I gave, I remember having a slide that showed an old image of the box of PC Coach coaching software. Like, I'm dating myself here. This goes back to, I think, the mid to late 1990s. And it was like, this is when you would buy software. I don't know, you would like call a number and like you would get a box in the mail and you would like stuff it in your desktop computer. And PC Coach was like the first I know of software application that would generate training plans for athletes based on inputs. And again, back close to 30 years here. So this stuff has existed, and I don't know, just like I'm an intellectually curious person. I'm fascinated by endurance sports training. I'm not sure I'm a technology guy, but I am really interested in the brain. And that's sort of the way I look at it, is like, just like these computers sort of trying to do things that brains do. And so I've just been kind of paying attention for a while and just thinking, if I created something like this, how would I do it? That sort of, when something percolates to the surface, in terms of like an advancement in what computers can do, I'm paying attention with two minds. Like, I don't want, again, it's not like thumbs up or thumbs down on technology.
Right.
It's just like, what can it do? What can it do? And actually the way I see it down the road is that I think every effective coach is going to be able to going to need to make use of artificial intelligence in some ways. It can just be kind of an assistant. Rough analogy is, to like, you look at what AI can do in writing. And I don't think AI will ever be able to replace best writers. It can replace average writers, but what it could even do for even the best writers is be kind of an editor. So it's like, you're the boss, you, the human, are the boss. But you're not saying like these technologies are bad, I'm going to ignore them. You're just like, how do I incorporate them? It's just like, I use different analogies, like a coach is a band leader, technology is the band, or at least one instrument in the band, that type of thing. So that's sort of how I see the landscape now, but it's going to be there's a lot of ferment and there's much to come.
Yeah, I appreciate your point. I think what you're trying to say is that human coaches will always be necessary, but the technology, including AI, may be helpful, right, in the process. Here's a question from Josh, who asks, how can an athlete know, this is somewhat AI related, how can an athlete know they are making progress when they trust their coach, but they can't tell until race day?
Yeah, I mean,
trust.
Yeah, I mean, you should be able to tell. I mean, certainly before race day. And so, I'll speak for myself and not necessarily what other coaches can do. I think if you were to survey the athletes I coach, they would say, yeah, I am aware that I'm making progress. And some of the athletes I coach haven't raced in months. And so how are they aware? Well, it's structured into the training. Is progressive. There's a lot of ways, different ways to see progress. So if we can just look at this week's training and compare it to the training you did 6 weeks ago, and it's more, that's progress, right? So it doesn't necessarily, you don't have to like do a race like fitness test to be it. So that is part of it. And also, again, a big emphasis in my coaching is keeping a process focused on things. So, obviously in training, you do very few limit testing workouts, few workouts that are so close to being as hard as a tell you where you are. So that you can't lean on that too much. But with my athletes, we're always working on something that is process related. It could be, pacing, different elements of workout execution, learning, getting better at making their own decisions. And so that is another way to see progress. It's like, yeah, I haven't raced in a minute, so I don't know exactly how fit I am, but like I'm getting much better at executing my workouts. And so that's another way. So that's really on the coach, honestly. It's just
point that out.
Yeah, to let them know, like, progress is manifold, and we're always making progress. And I think what helps that, like, sort of looking at training as learning, because like testing, yeah, that only happens every so often, but learning can be an everyday thing.
Cool. So you had your 5 points on why AI would be or why a human coach is going to be better than a robot coach. And at the end, you said if I had a subtitle for this training or something similar, that it would be 3 cheers for coaching.
Yeah.
But like if you were to write, let's say AI was totally out of the picture, what would be different about your presentation of why a human coach is good? Like what else would you add that wasn't a contrast to the AI component?
Yeah, the good one. There's more. Like I just finished today writing a blog post about curiosity as a key trait in something you see in the most successful coaches. And curiosity is one of those things, like, it's easy to overlook. But great coaches, you see it, are really curious people. They love to learn. And not just about their own sport. They're just curious in general, because, I think about people like Ben Rosario, like a truly great coach who spoke earlier today. He loves running. It is by no means the only thing he loves and is interested in. And he's able to pull from all these, like, you can pull from travel. I pull from reading fiction. I pull from just relationships. I pull from my own experience of getting older, and I'm just interested in all this stuff. And so I'm constantly just evolving, pulling from domains of science that don't seem like they would have anything to do with endurance sports. And then also, when you can, and this is kind of the point that I make in my blog post, like, when you can model curiosity for your athletes, they become curious. And it really, because what are you doing? Like, a lot of athletes, when there's any degree of uncertainty about how things are going to go, that's the cause of anxiety. It's like, oh, I don't know if I have time to get as fit as I want to be for my next race. I've seen that so many times in athletes, like, I don't know if I have time. And because they're uncertain about that, they're anxious. But you can have that exact same future-oriented uncertainty and look at it through the lens of curiosity. At all. It's just like, for me, I've had long COVID for over 2 years. I was just able to do my first run in over 2 years on January 1st. So I'm like, 19 days in, very early days, a lot of uncertainty about where this is headed, but I am not anxious because I'm just deeply curious. I'm like, good or bad, this is going to be interesting. And so it's something like you would just not even think of as like high on the list of qualities for great coaches. Curiosity is in there. And I made a glancing reference to humility. I think that's an absolutely huge one, because again, coaches have egos, but you need to, like, it's sort of the analogy I make is to journalists. Like, there's no such thing as an unbiased journalist. The best journalists are simply aware of and account for their biases. They don't eradicate them, because you cannot. So same thing with your ego as a coach. You have one, you cannot eradicate it, but you have to account for it as a coach and really check yourself. Like myself right now because it serves the athletes or because I like talking about myself. So it's just, that's another one you see in a lot of the greatest coaches is humility. And I could go on, but I won't.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That's good. You also recently had an experience where you were helping sort of write an AI type app, right? It didn't eventually launch, but and I may be asking something you're not an expert on, but in that experience, do you feel like, in your research with AI, since this is an AI specific, presentation, what would you say are the distinguishing features between just a formulaic app versus true AI? And I think a lot of places are branding themselves as AI, when in fact they just are formulas that are driving decisions.
Yeah. So it is fundamentally two different technologies. So like fake AI is just like algorithms that they just use like their if then statements. Like if this happens, then we do this. So it's just like a set of rules. And the program is just rigidly tied to those rules. It can't do anything sort of off script. AI is different, where you're I mean, it is rule based, but the rule framework is much looser. So all you're doing is creating like a set of parameters, and then you're feeding data. You're seeding the app with data. It's like, this is how it's done. Then induct the patterns or rules that you see infused in all these examples. So it's just like, the rules are implicit in the examples, and then the what those programs can do is something that's never been done before. So they can be truly generative, whereas like the if then types are only like just like kind of paint by numbers or do things by rote.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost a buyer beware, in that there are going to be more and more apps, whether it's athletic based apps or other apps, that are going to say they're AI generated as the hype gets bigger and bigger, when in fact they just may be formulaic, right? And it's going to be difficult to distinguish the advantage. And at that point, that's even worse. Thinking you're getting AI when you're not is a really poor decision for an athlete or anybody else, right? That's going to be poor.
Yep.
Julia asks, what would you tell an athlete who is judging their performance in training sessions too harshly? So it's not necessarily AI related, but it sort of is, because could AI do that? Right? What she's asking.
Yeah. I mean, that's super common. It's one of those, I think that Kira did a nice job of sharing a perspective on similar types of issues that athletes deal with, sort of on the mental level. Just kind of a similar perspective on those issues, where all said than done. I get it, but it really is just a matter of like trusting in the process, because I guess, it's sort of that growth mindset where you cannot look at every single workout you do as a test. They are stepping stones. Like what matters is just getting it done. And there are days when your body just doesn't have it and you're better off not doing it. But it's a matter of like, honestly, like looking, when you're judging your performance and workouts too harshly, you're not actually understanding what the workouts are supposed to do. Inaccurate. Like your performance in the workout doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like, we know how to train. Like if I fill out a questionnaire and I could create a training plan that I absolutely know would make you fitter. I know it. And all you do is do it. And so every day of that process isn't test day. Like, obviously, like if the plan's working, you're going to have good days and you're going to have those benchmarks where you see that you're improving. Watching your stocks too closely or weighing yourself too often, it's like, why? It's like, get rid of all these tests. Like training works. we know that training works. So just do the training and just keep, just kind of zoom out on the numbers. Yeah, you need to see the numbers improve, but not every single, like over time. And again, easier to at the Kira D'Amatos of the world, like the athletes who are performing at the highest level. That's exactly what you see them doing. Like, I trained with a team of pro runners for 13 weeks one summer. And so I was there. I saw the reel, and they just, it's almost counterintuitive. Like it's the highly competitive amateurs who are really uptight about their training. The pros are loose. They're like, hey, one bad workout, better luck tomorrow. And they just move on. So yeah, seems simplistic, but that is actually the formula, and it is doable. And just understanding that is true, I think is the first step. Like, just like truly the numbers in your next workout do not matter. Just doing the workout matters.
Julia, my wife, always tells me anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. So if it's worth doing, it's worth doing, right? No matter what the outcome is. So just keep doing that.
Well said. She's a wise woman.
That's right. So we are gonna wrap up. We're at the top of the hour. Any questions we didn't get to, feel free to email us at results@8020endurance.com, or Matt. I mean, we just go right to Matt at 8020endurance.com, David at 8020endurance.com, and we'll be happy to answer those questions on this topic. Thank you so much as we wrap up for our second annual endurance event. We really appreciate your participation and your trust in us. We've had a great time putting together these speakers, a wonderful time, meeting new people, learning new content. We're happy to have you, and really grateful to have you as some of our athletes who use our training plans or just have joined us today for the first time. Matt, anything as we close for this year?
Just a thank you again to our supporting sponsors who helped make this possible. And also, yeah, this recording will live on. Yeah, this is not your only opportunity to enjoy this material.
Thank you. It's a great reminder. You do have access to this. Of course, we had multiple speakers at a couple times today. So if you miss somebody, you have access to this material for the next 30 days on Excel events. Any questions that you have about accessing that, please email us and we'll take care of you. So thank you so much. We're sure we'll be talking to many of you throughout your training. Thanks for your support and for being part of the 80/20 team.
Thank you.